The phone rang one day. I heard a familiar voice on the other end. John Mulcahy. He said, "Hey Phil, how you doing?" We had a little small talk. Then he said, "Have you heard about this effort that's underway to try to get the park reopened?" He said, "We're trying to start a grassroots effort. We don't want this park to just wither away into nothing and never come back. Are you in?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I am. Pencil me in, brother."
I lived in New York, and after graduating from school, I worked for the JCPenney company in New York for 10 years as a product developer, product manager. And then I left JCPenney after 10 years, and I opened a chain of hair salons in Puerto Rico. The JCPenney company was located on 6th Avenue, and there was salons all over the place, and here you have this island with all these incredibly attractive women, and all the hair care was done in garages. There was no major hair salon. So we opened a major hair salon in one of the big malls there. We got a lot of publicity, we had tremendous business. So we did that for 6 or 7 years until this opportunity presented itself in Louisville. And as a result of that real estate project, turning it around successfully as a big luxury condominium project, I got a reputation in town for being good at turnarounds. So when the first Kentucky Kingdom went bankrupt in 1987, the Bank of Canada contacted me and said, "Hey, why don't you take a look at this? Can you turn around Kentucky Kingdom?" So I saw all the material and I said, "No way, Jose," because I had read all the stories about the disasters when it first opened in 1987. I wasn't interested at all. But they pressed me a little bit and they started sending me more information. And I said, "Well, it's an interesting business. Your costs are fixed, so if you drive attendance, you really can drive a big dollar to the bottom line." I was intrigued about that. Okay, now you know why they have the expression, ignorance is bliss. I wish it was that easy. It's not. So I went in thinking this was not going to be a particularly difficult business. Of course, like all business, it was very challenging. I'll never forget, I walked in, it was 10 acres in a circle, just a little 10-acre park. If you walked in the front and looked right, you'd see parking lots beyond the chain link fence. If you looked left, you'd see parking lots beyond the chain link. It was the most just awfully depressing sight.
It was just, it was a 10-acre tract of land, basically right there. It was just almost just an extension of the fairgrounds at the time.
The period of time that I visited the park was during the state fair that year. And I think that was part of the strategy, was that the park would either be the tail of the dog of the Kentucky State Midway, because that had, a proven attendance and revenue number, but it wasn't memorable. It wasn't, typical theme park experience. It was just very barren.
Part of its failure in 1987 was when it came to Louisville, it was advertised as Disney Comes to Kentucky. 10 acres. So of course people were completely disappointed, because when they come out they think they're going to see Disney.
The only thing that made it sound like Disney was that many of the comments, very similar to the stories you hear about the opening of the Disney park in Anaheim. I mean, it was a disaster.
We all have this awesome respect for Disney. They're the gold standard, but you never compare yourself to Disney. How can you? There's only one Disney. That was the kiss of death.
I've had the opportunity to work for a lot of really intelligent, really shrewd businessmen, and I would put Ed Hart right up there at the top of them. I've always kind of said he's a good mixture of New York street smarts with Harvard Business School.
Ed has always been the boss, but doesn't necessarily carry himself as the boss. As I say, he's more of a captain of a team that he's assembled, has high expectations from everyone, but he doesn't have any higher expectations for the team members than he does for himself.
The funny thing about my background is I really was never into theme parks or amusement parks at all. I mean, I remember going to Coney Island in New York as a child, but I don't remember riding anything. And in fact, even today, I don't ride the ride. The irony of my professional life is that I have motion sickness, so I don't ride any of the rides. But I do select the rides. not everybody that goes to a theme park is a rider. They come in family groups. So if you can entertain people who aren't necessarily riders, and you can do that by having wonderful sight lines, making sure they're close to the loading areas, they can see the attractions swirl around them, that just makes for a better experience for them. So I appreciate the non-rider, and I'm essentially a non-rider. On occasion, I'm forced to ride, which is not one of my wonderful days. For example, if I have a certain dignitary, maybe a governor that's helping us open a park, or a senator, I may get stuck, and I say that affectionately, I may get stuck riding a ride, in which case I usually close my eyes and I hold on for dear life.
He's got such a vision, such an imagination that, yeah, he can sense, he can look at a ride and he can tell you, this is a keeper, this is something we have to have for the park. Of course, then he has, the minions, and I say that, with all true respect and never treated that way, but it's, Johnny, come over here, I want you to ride this ride with Tori and tell me what you think, and he's never missed.
When we opened the park for the first day in 1990, the night before I said, we're not open and we're not ready. We just weren't ready. The park was not ready. There were things not done yet. There was some landscaping not finished. I just wasn't. So we actually postponed the opening in 1990 for a whole week before we opened. And that's a tough decision, but when you're not ready, you're not ready.
So 1990, I just gotten hired to come work to Kentucky Kingdom for its inaugural grand reopening.
They corralled us into the amphitheater, and it was kind of a pep rally type of atmosphere to talk about what to expect with Kentucky Kingdom, what the big plans were, what we should look for during the summer.
And at the end he said, guys, who's got a shovel at home?
We're a little bit short on our landscaping, so everybody, if you can just grab a shovel, go grab some plants, help us get the rest of these plants in the ground, that'd be great, thanks.
So what could I do? I went home, I got a shovel, and I spent the rest of the afternoon planting some bushes and shrubs and a couple trees.
The first thing we did was added 3 acres.
When the park reopened under Ed Hart in 1990, it was just on one side of the road. Thunder Run was the next big attraction that was supposed to open up at the end of the 1990 season. Well, it finally opened up in time for the state fair, and that side of the park didn't have anything on it except for Thunder Run and a lot of dirt. When they had expanded the expressway, which was not too far from the park, all the fill dirt for the expressway ended up in a huge mountain where Hurricane Bay currently sits. And all the dust would blow over the road and settle on everything in the park. I think we did a lot more dusting that first season than we've ever had to do since.
So when I started at the park, I started in the entertainment department as one of the costume characters. Back then we had King Louis, we had a Merlin magician, and then we had a page, and we basically got paid to walk around the park and entertain the kids and the guests in the park. So yeah, it's King Louis. It's a big, it was this big furry lion, which is absolutely great when it's 100 degrees outside, as it tends to get here in Louisville. And what would normally be like a 30-minute trip out to visit the guests turned into maybe 10 or 12 minutes. Some days it was 8, depending upon how much you could just really stand inside this big furry outfit that was, King Louis.
So sometime around 1998, 99, there was a meeting called by Ed Hart for all the full-time staff. He said, well, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is the park's going to stay open. The bad news is I've sold it.
There were a number of operators who were very interested in purchasing Kentucky Kingdom. The Cedar Fair Group was interested. We weren't sure if we wanted to sell or not, but the park had a great reputation because we went from 137,000 people to that 1.3 million plus in a very short period of time. So we were growing astronomically, so we got the attention of a lot of operators. We first spoke with the Premier Parks people. We negotiated, it took us about a year, and then they bought us.
I think it took several months or more before we found out that they had actually purchased Six Flags and decided to rebrand Kentucky Kingdom as a Six Flags park as well. So that was a huge announcement full of balloons and Looney Tunes characters and all manner of nonsense. We were kind of excited. We felt like we were going to the big leagues.
Initially I thought it was a good thing. I felt like, for a park that always kind of fought an uphill battle and was always sort of the underdog in the regional, amusement park wars, if you will. I felt like it gave it a certain degree of instant credibility.
Kentucky Kingdom was the first park to be named the Six Flags Park in 25 years. And our whole squad was very happy about that because it was an acknowledgement of how good the park was. It had the attractions to measure up to a Six Flags park. We were glad that we sold it to them, but part of our deal was to make sure they would continue to invest in the facility, that nothing bad would happen to that facility. I stayed with Six Flags for about 6 months or so in an executive position just to help during that transition, and I left shortly thereafter.
Ed Hart always has been a go-getter, an entrepreneur, a decision maker. And I can't say that he really liked the idea of having to answer to somebody else. I can't blame him. You know, it was his baby. He started the place.
I started at Astroworld in '76. I actually sold ice cream at the Astrodome. And my neighbor, he'd gone to work at Astroworld. So I thought, that sounds like fun. So I went down, applied, and I got home and I got a call and they said, "You're hired. You're going to work in the games department." I was like, wow. You know, it was going to be a summer job. But then I got there and I started meeting people. They became like a second family to you. You know, every year I went back, it was like, okay, this is it. And then after a while, I was like, this isn't it. This is it. This is the job. When I heard Astroworld was closing, I mean, that broke my heart. You know, I had been there, almost 30 years. And it's like, what am I going to do? This is all I know. I've stayed on and helped ship everything out, all the merchandise, the kitchen equipment, basically anything that had to be shipped out, I shipped out. And one day, Andy Michaelry was the director of the revenue division. He called me up and asked me what I thought about Louisville. And I said I didn't know anything about Louisville other than Freedom Hall and bourbon and baseball bats. And I knew the park was here. And he said they had an opening in the warehouse and asked if I'd be interested in coming up. And I was like, absolutely. All I got to do is open the door, put my dog in the car, and we're gone. March 25th, 2006, I pull into Louisville. It's a smaller park than Astroworld. The fact that it had been open and closed, you know, and then opened again, it didn't really have the following that Astroworld had. But the people that I worked with here, that was a lot the same. You know, it was starting to feel like family all over again.
When Ed and his team ran the park, I mean, again, it was pretty much an owner-operator type of business where the people who are making the decisions are here on a day-to-day basis. In a large corporation like Six Flags, you have people that are making the decisions who may have never stepped foot in the park. So it's just very hard to kind of stay on top of what needs to happen in an operation when you're so far removed from the operation that you don't see the direct results of the decisions that you're making.
Premier Parks ultimately bit off more than they could chew when they took on Six Flags and then continued to buy parks after that. And we very quickly became a little fish in a big pond. At first, we saw resources coming to us that we didn't have before, but shortly thereafter, the resources were being diverted elsewhere. It was kind of a big pill to swallow, knowing that your park management ultimately answered to somebody out of town in another city with other parks on their agenda. We were no longer the focus of attention.
Occasionally there'd be a decent-sized, larger attraction. Certainly nothing prototypical or genre-breaking as maybe we had seen before. So it almost didn't matter how well or how bad the park was doing. You were controlled by outside forces. So if another park within the Six Flags system started to decline, they would have to cut expenses across the whole system.
If they continued on that path, it was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, theme parks survive by what's new and different every year, and here, you know, you're taking a market that had been wound up with, you know, something new every year. Sometimes we were building, you know, whole sections in a year, and all of a sudden, it's like a war game. Sections of the park are being closed each season, and rides are being taken out of commission each season. It was inevitable that something had to give.
All of the assets belong to the state. Once the rides were built, the coasters were built, those fixtures essentially belonged to the state. The Six Flags was just the operator, so they weren't allowed to move a major asset or sell off a major asset without specifically the state signing off on it. One of the managers told me that Chang, the premier roller coaster in the park, was coming out. And I asked him why it was coming out, and he said that Six Flags had announced a big water park expansion. And even at the time, it didn't sit right with me. I'm like, why would you pull out your premier signature coaster and say that you're going to replace it with water park expansion when you could easily just move it somewhere else? I remember being very suspicious and thinking they're pulling this coaster out in the middle of the night and something bad's going to happen to the park.
As time progressed and the attendance continued to drop because of the public reputation that the park had, nobody came. And ultimately, that's what led to the closure of the park for the 2009 season being the last season of operations.
That was a really rough time because we had no warning. All of a sudden, we just got a call from corporate saying that we no longer have a position for you, we're closing the park. Thank you for your service, and that was it.
My first thought was, oh my God, here we go again. How could they do that to us? You know, and then you just get into it that, you know, this is what's happening. We got to deal with it. We got to close it down. But the whole time I'm like, what am I going to do?
I was a bit resentful when Six Flags closed the park, just because there were a lot of good people who worked for Six Flags, but at the time, and I know their corporate structure's changed out several times in the last few years, but at the time, the corporation, at least to me, felt a bit soulless. Kentucky Kingdom is unlike any other park in the country. So when you try to run that park the same way as a park in California or Colorado or New York, it doesn't work.
I knew they didn't own the land, so I was pretty sure they weren't going to be able to do to this place what they had done to Astroworld. So you held out hope.
I remember in 2011, I was attending a conference across the street, and I knew one of the security guards who was just out there kind of maintaining the perimeter. So I went out there, I asked him if I could walk through the property. He said, yeah, I can come on through, and I took some pictures and various things, and I was just shocked how quickly the buildings got dilapidated, the grounds got dilapidated. I was obviously real discouraging, and I was really worried that the park might not be able to be brought back. So just as a fan, I created SaveKentuckyKingdom.com, and on that website I was able to list like those pictures that I took when I went through. I put those on there. I kind of had a call of action for people who would visit the park to be able to contact their local state representative or contact the governor and just try to help put a little bit of pressure, just try to help that movement.
One of the many projects that my company was working on was a touring musical act for children, and we were playing the Indiana State Fair, and I'd come back that afternoon and I was watching the local news here in Louisville, and the governor was featured. When the reporters would question him as to, well, what's going to happen with, Kentucky Kingdom, and he'd kind of raise his hands and say, well, we've tried to make a theme park work there. It just doesn't seem to be working. At some point we're going to have to, fish or cut bait. And that just resonated with me that, if the media wasn't investigating what was happening with Kentucky Kingdom, nobody was asking. There weren't any interviews, there wasn't any noise, there wasn't any, any suitors, so to speak. So I'm just sitting there at home thinking, what could we do? And it just hit me, it's like, what about some of the names of people that, worked at the park in the past? They've still got to live in the community. And my go-tos were Phil Anderson, Troy Thomas, Dan English.
I was contacted by John Mulcahy, who was interested in putting together this group who could help get a message out to state representatives and also just the general public to get them aware of what was going on. That was the biggest thing, is I think that the general public wasn't aware of just how close Kentucky Kingdom was to the wrecking ball. Right from the beginning, we created a Facebook page, and that really grew into a Facebook community. I think we got over 5,000 or 6,000 people at one point. A lot of people were asking, what can we do to try to help in this movement?
We needed to get the consumers that at once cherished this park engaged and aware that this is for real. That we're very close to seeing this park bulldozed under. And then at the same time, we realized we need to get some advocates, and that at the political level.
John would send the local politicians, this fish wrapped in newspaper. If you recall, the mob would also mark their victims putting a fish in a newspaper.
Well, it was inspired because of the comment that continued to be the soundbite all weekend long, is that it's time to fish or cut bait.
I.e., that means they had to make a decision to allow us to open the park or not.
We probably sent out either 160 or 225 packets that were not only governor, lieutenant governor, but media and other, other stakeholders in the project, other people that we thought that if we could just plant the seed and get them talking about the park again and the what ifs, and we didn't know who that person was going to be, so we had to get broad.
After Kentucky Kingdom closed, the rumor mill started to circulate that Ed Hart might be interested in reopening the park, and he tried, but he got refused by the state of Kentucky for reasons I don't know. The state of Kentucky, I guess, put out feelers to see if anybody else would be interested in reopening the park, and then Holiday World raises her hand and says, look over here. We might be willing to resurrect your park. And I guess the state of Kentucky got a little excited because these guys at Holiday World, they also know what they're doing too. And they've got a proven track record. They put together a concept where they would rebrand Kentucky Kingdom as Bluegrass Boardwalk and started off on a slightly smaller scale with the intention of growing it year by year.
It just struck me as it wasn't a full-hearted commitment to restoring and reopening the full park. And that's what was critical for Kentucky Kingdom to succeed again, was not to just leave 2 rides and a water park operating. If I owned Holiday World, would I want to have another park competing in my backyard? No, I don't want to duplicate expenses and capital. But would I want a water park that I could use as a promotional offer? Be a member of the water park in Louisville and have season pass privileges to the park at Santa Claus, Indiana? Absolutely, it made a strategic, alignment.
I was like, let's just see. I've been through this enough. Let's see. As soon as I start seeing some action, seeing something happen, see that they're bringing people on, then I'll be excited.
As time went on, the opening date continued to get pushed back. Fewer and fewer details were easily accessible about what was coming back to the park when the park would reopen.
The people at Holiday World realized only too late that the state wanted a lot more sway over how decisions were made at the park than what they were used to dealing with. And their story, at least to the public, was we'd like to be masters of our own fate, and this partnership was going to have a few too many constraints for us to work with. Now, if that was the actual reason, I don't know, but that's what was sold to the public.
It was a huge sigh that was just let out the whole entire city, because it's like, well, who is going to come back to a park that has been sitting vacant for several years and is now in a dilapidated state? In that time, it seemed like it was impossible.
I'm at one of our Save My Park meetings at a local pizza joint, and we're discussing strategy for getting the message out to the media about the initiative to reopen the park. We're snowballing, throwing ideas back and forth, and one of the members of our meeting, Seth, says, why don't we use King Louie? And John says, well, yeah, but we don't have King Louie. And everybody nodded their heads. And then Seth said, oh, but we do. What? Some time back, Seth returned to work in entertainment one season at Kentucky Kingdom. And he was cleaning out things in the back of the old amphitheater toward the end of the season when he came across a dusty old box on top of a shelf. So he pulls it down, blows off the dust, opens it up, and what should he find inside? King Louie. King Louie taking a long cat nap. Well, Seth had to think quick because he knew from his background in entertainment that an old mascot in a new park wasn't going to work. They were going to demand that he be put out to pasture, because the original Louie was put out to pasture when Six Flags first came on. So everybody thought that King Louie was dead and gone. Well, now Seth knew differently, and he knew he couldn't take him out through the front gate. He knew he couldn't ask for management permission, because that would just lead to the dumpster. So he made a split-second decision, to smuggle Louie out of the park. Seth took the box, put it on a flatbed, and rolled him over to the old stunt show amphitheater, and then threw him over the fence and waited for his shift to end. Then he drove around back, threw him in the back seat, and drove like a bat out of hell to wherever. And he wondered, what am I going to do with Louie? I can't keep a grown wild animal in my house. So he called up his old friend Jacob, who played the park most famously of Louie, and said, Jacob, do you have room at your apartment for a unemployed lion? And Jacob said, this sounds familiar, bring him over. So then Louie proceeded to shack up at Jacob's place for probably close to a decade, doing what a cat does when it has no job, taking long cat naps. When Jacob and Seth showed up at that Save My Park meeting and said, we have Louie, well, they had Louie, and Louie wanted a job. He wanted his old job back as the goodwill ambassador of fun, and he was willing to hit the pavement pretty hard to plead his case.
The local government had kind of underestimated just how many lives Kentucky Kingdom had touched over the course of its 20 years of existence. There was rumors that they may just add fairgrounds expansion there, another wing or a parking lot or something like that. And that obviously didn't set well with me or anyone else in the Save My Park group. I mean, anytime the governor got on TV and talked about the park, we felt that there was a chance it's not going to reopen.
They kept referring to the fact that there was going to be a public inspection by those individuals or companies that were interested in possibly completing their proposal and submitting it. That was when we had probably our second media event, and that was King Louie. But Louie was there, representatives were there, and we watched who entered the facility. We recognized some of the faces. One, of course, was Ed Hart and his team. Others were again some prominent players in the industry that had sent their ambassadors, so to speak, but there weren't many. There weren't many.
The politicians had other uses for this property. Remember, the property is on the crossroads of two interstate highways and across from the international airport. This is one of the premier pieces of property in Kentucky. But John and his band of rebels, pitchforks in hand, storming the castle, no pun intended, storming the kingdom, kept it top of mind that the highest and best use for the community and tourism was as a theme park. Really made all the difference in the world to get this park reopened in 2014.
Kentucky Kingdom closed in 2009, and the Fair Board needed some advice on getting a new operator for the park. I have a little bit of notoriety in Louisville, and they asked for my advice, and I was happy to give them some free advice, and lo and behold, that led to me getting re-involved again and reassembling my staff to open the park, which we did in 2014.
Paperwork signed, we have a target date, we know we're gonna open. Anything they wanted me to do, I would do it. We had to go through stuff that was left from Six Flags and sort it out and decide what was good, what was bad, what we could keep, what we could use. The night before, we were still putting out tables, putting out benches, making sure everything was perfect, ready to go.
We had a throng of people outside the front gate, and when the crowd saw me, they started chanting, Ed, Ed, Ed. It brought a tear to my eye. It was sensational. Ed, Ed. And you said, geez, we worked hard for this. And they're grateful. It was wonderful. I'll tell you, they should have been saying team, because it's not Ed, it's a whole team that gets this done.
I came in opening day, they gave me a Kentucky Kingdom shirt, and I was there from open to close and just helped assist. Again, being a former operations manager at the park, I kind of knew the way things needed to go. But it was a great day. It was a lot of fun, a lot of smiles on people's faces, and just one of those dreams that came true as far as hoping that this moment would happen and then seeing it realized was just pretty amazing.
Nobody in this community ever gave us any hope of really succeeding with the redevelopment of Kentucky Kingdom. They were busy telling you about how the previous park had failed, how it was a kiddie park, it was less than 13 acres, you're never going to do it, you're never going to do it, you're never going to do it. Every time I was interviewed by local media, they would always introduce me as, John Mulcahy of the formerly bankrupt Kentucky Kingdom. And I mean, this went on forever and ever.
And in the course of that conversation, the reporter turned to me and he said, you know, we're talking to John Mulcahy with Kentucky Kingdom. When did you know that this park was going to be successful? And I turned around and shook his hand and I thanked him right then and there. And he was dumbfounded on TV, live. He says, why? I says, for the first time in 2.5 years, you introduced me as John Mulcahy of Kentucky Kingdom, not John Mulcahy of the formerly bankrupt Kentucky Kingdom. So, I mean, it took a lot of work to get people to believe, and, you know, seeing is believing.
It's much better to see a park get rebuilt than to see a park get torn down piece by piece.
In order to have gotten Grease Lightning back operational for the park, it was going to cost about $4 million. It was going to take a new launch system, new train, new operating system, because it had sat 4 years neglected. It was spent a little more, and we got a brand new experience.
Michael Chance really recognized that a lot of parks can afford a 10, 15, up to $35 million full-on hyper coaster just of their size. So as Michael began to look through and see what the market needed, is we realized that there needed to be a smaller footprint, something that could give that same level of thrill and excitement, very smooth ride, with being within a price point that the parks can recognize.
It went up rather quick because it didn't start construction until they finished construction with Banshee, which was unique because the company that built Banshee put it together. The day they finished it, the very next day they were at our park putting ours together.
Joe Draves and Alan Schilke were instrumental in that layout, so everything that you get from a Schilke ride or what Joe's doing is in Lightning Run. It's their heart and soul really is into that ride and the layout.
You don't have to dissipate the energy. So instantly you can go into other twists and turns. And this is from a guy who doesn't ride the rides. People tell me this. I'm not even sure I've ridden Lightning Run today, but I understand the physics of it. And the physics is if you don't have the huge 300-foot drop, which take a while to dissipate the energy, Lightning Run gives you a lot of twists and turns. It's very dynamic, tremendous airtime, and it just gets rave reviews. And it was a prototype.
We know that if Ed says, I want this coaster, this is the right place for it, it's going to be successful, we said, we'll be happy to support you.
If somebody says to me, what's the reason why a park is successful? So a lot of people pause, you got a lot of scholars think what makes a theme park successful. When I visited one of the Six Flags managers, he paraphrased what James Carville said. James Carville was a campaign manager for Bill Clinton. When people would ask him, why is Clinton going to win? It's the economy, stupid. Well, this gentleman, the Six Flags president, looked at me when I said, hey, what does it take? You know, I was new in the industry. What does it take to be successful, to get a park? He looked at me and he said, and he smiled, and he said, it's the ride, stupid. And that's exactly what it is. It's not profound, it's the ride, stupid. And better than that, it's the coasters. People travel for coasters. I've never forgotten that. And we put in a lot of coasters at Kentucky Kingdom since I first got involved in 1990, a lot of coasters. And we'll continue to do so.
Rocky Mountain put in the bid to work on what was Twisted Sisters. Twisted Sisters was twin track, dueling coaster. So the idea was to connect the two of them and make one really long ride with two lifts, something to that effect. Attendance didn't hit what we wanted it to, so we modified it and we got the layout we have. What's unique about it, it still uses both sides of the original layout. It just weaves back and forth between the two.
My name is Peter Schwab. I'm an operator here on Storm Chaser and other rides here at Kentucky Kingdom, such as T3. I've ridden Storm Chaser a total of 1,074 times as of right now. It's ridiculous. The airtime is unlike any other. This thing can throw you around like crazy.
You know, I rode Steel Vengeance the other day, but then when you ride Storm Chaser, it's almost like the airtime is just as good, if not better. Maybe you don't get like as much, but with how like short and compact the ride is, everything it packs, just airtime hill to airtime hill. It's an experience you don't get on a lot of rides, but Storm Chaser offers it.
Folks in town were a little surprised when I got energized for Kentucky Kingdom because they didn't have a high regard for the park. And the staff worked very hard and all, but the park did have a bad reputation. And now here we are, 4 short years later, and you only hear wonderful things about the park. And that's very gratifying. And I love that. That's why I like the turnarounds. The turnarounds are intriguing to me. One of the things I'm asked most often when I talk to financial people, why didn't you change the name? The park had issues going all the way back to 1990. Why did you call it Kentucky Kingdom when it went bankrupt? Or the second time when Six Flags had some issues, the park closed for 4 years. Why didn't you reopen with a different name? That's very simple. The public knows what the park is. They know what the name of the park is. You're not going to fool the public. They know what it is. We're not trying to run away from the park. We're trying to make the park better. That's Kentucky Kingdom. Hey, was Kentucky Kingdom before Six Flags? It was Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom, and it's Kentucky Kingdom afterwards.
If you spend any amount of time in this business, you can't help but love what you do and enjoy the people you work with and build relationships. You'll want to work for somebody that you see them every day. They're here, and it shows that they care.
He brings out the best in everybody that's a member on the team. I would like to think that over the years our relationship has been certainly an employer, boss, team captain, but personally I sort of the big brother I never had.
He's an amusement park guy. Whether you ride the rides or not, it's in his blood, and hopefully he'll continue to do it for eternity.
No matter what the state said, no matter what the governor said, he always thought there would be a way. He wanted to see the benefits it brought to the community. He wanted to see the beauty, the setting, everything about the park that he had always loved come back to life.
For me, it's all about the feeling you get when you go to the park. I still remember the feeling I had as a kid, walking into Kentucky Kingdom the first time. So I don't think those type of experience can be quantified sometimes. I hope people continue to really support the park and what it stands for, so those memories can continue to be made for future generations.
The best thing to ever happen to Kentucky was Six Flags leaving. I had faith that it would reopen, not like Astroworld. Astroworld, they came to town, they said, we're closing you down, that's it, that's over. Here, I don't think they really expected it to go that way. This was a chance to fix, broken hearts. Here's one that they didn't want, people had no faith in. But those of us that worked here had faith, and Mr. Hart had faith. He's given me an opportunity that Six Flags never did.
I have not one regret. I never regret about anything in life. You take the hand that is dealt you and you make the most of the hand. Do we have some surprises? Sure. Do we overcome a lot of things? Absolutely. Hey, there's nothing more gratifying than at the end of the evening when people are pouring out of our park, they're smiling. They may have been exhausted because there's so many things going on, but they're smiling. To see a family smile together, that's precious. We don't have occasion to come together that often anymore. Think about this world of smartphones and all that. Everybody's doing their own thing. They're all disconnected. When you're in a theme park, the family comes together. It's fun for everybody, of all ages, young and old. And I think that's very rewarding for myself, my staff, to make people happy. And that's what we're trying to deliver. Memories to last a lifetime.
I know one day my kids are going to look back and say, we had a lot of fun times out at Kentucky Kingdom when we were little, didn't we? Yes, we did. I hope they remember the good stuff, because there were a lot of fond memories made out at that park, and there's a lot more yet to come. I think the park's, roller coaster history is behind it, and it should be smooth sailing for the foreseeable future. Certainly, there's no more interesting story out there than the one Kentucky Kingdom's had.